Alright, in this video we're going to talk about piecewise functions, so this kind of attaches to the 12 basic functions. So a piecewise function is going to be a function that is made up of two or more functions. So it's going to have multiple pieces. Each piece is going to be a function, and that's where piecewise comes from. So it's going to have generally two pieces, but sometimes we might see three. Occasionally it'll be four, but not very often. So it's just a function that's made up of two or more functions. So let's kind of take a look at what I'm talking about here. If we look here, it says, which of the 12 basic functions can be described as, f of x equals x when x is greater than or equal to 0, and negative x when x is less than 0. So in order to see this, let's kind of take a look at a graph and see what we're talking about here. So if we draw our axis in there, we'll just kind of throw in a couple points. So how we want to think about this is in two separate parts. We want to think about this first part here when x is greater than 0. So if x is greater than or equal to 0, our function f of x is going to act like x. So that would look like this. That's the graph of y equals x. Now, if we want, and actually we can kind of put a little dotted line here to show the entire thing of x, but we don't really want to consider this dotted part because we really only care when x is greater than or equal to 0. If x is less than 0, our function is going to act like negative x. So negative x looks like this. And then we're going to put a little dotted spot here. We really don't want to think about that dotted part because, again, we only want to consider the function if we are less than or equal to 0. So if we're less than or equal to 0, our function is going to look like negative x. So all this stuff where x is greater than 0, so everything over here isn't really going to count. So that's why we made it dotted. So which of our 12 basic functions can be written this way? Well, that looks like the absolute value of x. So absolute value of x is actually a piecewise function. So let's look at graphing another one of these things. So use what you know about the 12 basic functions to graph f of x equals x squared if x is less than or equal to 0, or x is the square root of x if x is greater than 0. So we're going to do just a quick sketch. We're not going to have the precise numbers. So I'm not really going to put scales on the x or y. But we know what x squared looks like. X squared is going to look like, so let's call this one red. X squared is going to look like this. I kind of messed this part up here. But we really only care when x is less than or equal to 0. So this stuff over here, when the x values are greater than 0, we don't care about. So we're really going to come by and we're going to erase that because it's part of the x values that we don't care about. So then we go back and we look at the second part, square root of x if x is greater than 0. Well, the square root of x looks like that. And that really only exists when x is greater than 0, so there's nothing over here that I have to erase. So this is what our piecewise function is going to look like for this problem. And then last but not least, evaluating piecewise functions. Evaluate the function f of x given this piecewise function here at the x values negative 1, 0, and 1. So if we want to evaluate f of negative 1, really that just means plug negative 1 into the function, but we have to be careful. We need to make sure we plug it into the correct part. So if we look here, we're saying x is less than 0. Negative 1 is less than 0, so we want to put negative 1 into that top part. So negative 1 squared is 1, plus 1 is going to give us 2. Now f of 0, we got to look again. This is less than 0, this is greater than or equal to 0, so we're going to want to use the second piece for f of 0, so 0 minus 1 equals negative 1. And then f of 1, so we've got to look again, less than 0, greater than or equal to 0, so we're going to use the second piece. Oops. So 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. So that's going to do it. We'll see you in the next video.